everyone. I'm about to introduce to you author Sherry Jones and Josephine Baker's Last Dance right there. I could have cried when I got done with this book. Did you ever read a book that you're like, that makes you that emotional and it's not because it's like some kind of romance book? No, this is a biography of a woman I knew nothing about. I thought I knew, right? But this makes me like mad about what they don't teach you in school because she would have been somebody that I would have loved to learn about in school. And because it's history. Her life is history. And anyway, I think I'm going to get really emotional when I'm talking to Sherry, but I am really, really excited that I get to talk to her about this, and because I love when I finish a book. This is why I do this, so I can talk to the author and be like, I read your book and I loved it, and I get to tell her that, and nothing makes me happier. So everybody, here is Sherry. Hi, everyone. I am so excited because I am speaking with author Sherry Jones, and we are talking about her brand new book. Came out December 31st, called Josephine Baker's Last Dance. She has the copy right there, and she's going to show us this amazing cover. You know what, Sherry, when I saw this cover, I knew nothing, but I was like, I want to read that book. First of all, I love historical fiction, history, whatever, but when I saw it, I'm like, I know nothing about her, and that cover is amazing, so I know I'm going to read this book. And so I'm so happy that we get to talk about this book today.
I'm glad that you feel that way about the cover. I'll make sure to share that with my editor and publishing team because we went through three different versions of the cover before we finally landed on the perfect one. So
Oh,
it was a pretty difficult choice.
yeah.
Yeah, they didn't want the book to look like a biography. And
Mm.
so there was resistance at first to putting her on the cover of the book for that reason.
Hmm.
But ultimately, they found just the perfect cover. And I love the colors and, the sepia tone in in
Ah,
the photo. And then they've actually they colorized her dress a little bit. You can really not see it
yeah.
very, very well, but when you see the actual cover, and then it's tactile, the
Oh,
letters are embossed, you want to touch it. So
I'm going to go
it's
to Barnes
beautiful.
and Noble just to touch it, okay? I don't get to touch the book, so I'm gonna go and I do that when I go to Barnes and Noble. It's just to see the books that I've read because I never get
Oh.
to touch the books. But anyway, this book,
But
like I was
you're an
telling,
ebook reader.
I have to.
Yeah.
I have to do
Yeah.
digital. Sometimes I get the books, but I have to in order to read as many. Sometimes I do audio, but in order to have, because I'm doing them every day, so I have to have it on my phone. So,
Yeah.
to carry a book around is kind of tough.
Yeah. I love ebooks myself.
Well,
I love all kinds of books, but
yeah, I do too. And I do love a hardcover. I mean, that's my preference. It's just for what I'm doing right now. It's really tough to sit down and hold a book. But anyway, okay, let's just start at the beginning. So, the title, I love this title because
thank you.
you start, and we're not doing spoilers, even, it's historical fiction, but I mean, you start with her last dance, and then you end with her last dance, and then everything in between, and it's just, you did it so beautiful. I cannot tell you how much I will read anything you write. Okay.
Well, thank you. Well, I have four previous novels, so you better get busy.
I saw that. I did. I saw that, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, she has four other books. I can just start. I can just keep,"
Oh, thank
because
you.
it's lyrical, and to talk about her. First of all, what made you pick her? Because I saw your other people that you've written about, and she's kind of a little different than what
Well,
you usually write.
yeah, well, my last book, The Sharp Hook of Love, was about the legendary 12th century lovers and scholars, Abelard and Heloise. And yeah, they're an amazing couple. And their story was very tragic. And so, as I wrote that book, I was crying. And when
Oh,
I finished it, I was thinking, I need something a little more lighthearted. And so I had always been interested in Josephine Baker, and in sort of just a random conversation with my editor about my next project, I mentioned her. And suddenly I thought, wow, if no one else has written about her, if there have been no other historical novels about her recently, then I need to check this out because this would be so much fun. And all I really knew about her was what everybody else knows about her,
Right.
the nude black dancer in the banana skirt.
Yep.
And yeah, so I was like, it's going to be a lot of fun. I'll get to go to Paris and, again. And so when I started researching her, though, I realized after, my first book that I read about her, I realized what an amazing person she was and how much more there was to her than the banana skirt. And so I was then totally enthralled.
Oh,
Um, yeah, but as I continued researching and writing, it wasn't until probably I was about maybe, I don't know, 6 months or more into my research when it really dawned on me how much race defined Josephine Baker's life, and that's what my book would have to be about. And as a white person, that was really intimidating for me. I'm like, how will I ever do this topic justice? But I decided just to tell her story and to tell it in the third person because I could not ever deign to even
yeah.
presume to know what it's like to be a person of color. So I told her story in third person, and I was very excited to frame it around her last performance. I had had this idea, I don't know, 2.5 years before the book was finished, and spent a lot of time trying to find a copy of the program for her last show. And I finally found one on eBay and I bought it. And when I opened it, my heart sank because so many of the scenes in that last performance are scenes that never happened in her life. Like she never went to Russia, as far as, according to anything I ever
Right.
read. But there's a whole Russia scene with Russian dancers, doing the kick dances and stuff. And I was like, what am I going to do about this? Because she never went there, and there are other similar scenes. So I what I did was I compromised between doing the chronological first draft,
Hmm.
which was just her life in chronological order, compromise between that and following the program for her final performance faithfully, which I did in one of my revisions of the manuscript. I did that. I rearranged the book and I wrote new scenes. I didn't write a Russia scene. I sort of skimmed over that one, but I wrote scenes that didn't make it into the final draft because they were just for that draft of the book to try to sort of shoehorn her life into this um, performance, this program that did not follow her life chronologically. It skipped all over the place. And so after I rewrote the book, I sent it to my agent, and she called me and said, I am so confused. Like, like in this part, you have her, 23 years old and with this guy, Pepito. And then in this part, you have her, 35 years old and not with him anymore. And then she's back with Pepito again, but you don't
Mm.
explain what happened. And she's 24 again, and so I realized that I couldn't do it that way. So this was a compromise. And, um, I love how, I mean, myself, my editor and I worked on this together, which is why I dedicated the book to her. She really helped me to through and to come up with different ideas, and she made suggestions for how I could arrange the book this way. And I love how, you're in the book puts you on the stage during the performance
Yeah.
and describes what's happening on the stage. And then it sort of, fades away to scenes from her life that this part of the performance is alluding to. I rearranged the program to fit the book ultimately and left some parts out, but it is essentially faithful to the program and to her life.
Oh my
So
gosh. Now that you say that, like, I'm like, oh, I so get it. Like the way the title, because I kept going back to the title and I was like, okay, is it because she starts and then end? But now I'm like, I want to go back. I'm going to go back and look at that because I did love how you were putting those small chapters in between that were describing what was going on. It was beautiful. That's what I kept thinking as
thank
I was reading.
you.
I was like, this is done so beautifully. You did her so much justice. I went on YouTube and I watched some of her stuff. stuff, excuse me, because I had to, because I was like, all I knew was that banana skirt thing. And I was
Yeah,
like, I wanted to
right.
see more of her. And you did her so much justice. And I was thinking about what you've had to write about with going through the war with World War II, and then going through, well, before that, there was the race issues. And then World War II, and then more race issues. And then we had the 1960s, and, everything that she had to go through. And like I don't know why I never heard of her as such a civil rights, to come to the United States and say, I'm not performing in a segregated audience. Like, I'm like, why didn't I hear of that? Like,
Right.
why did I
Yeah.
not hear about that? History class, all like, why are we not talking about this? Because who was saying that at that time,
That's right. 1951, she was using her power and her platform to take a stand against segregation. And she did. She came to the United States. She was invited to perform in a nightclub in Miami. And she said, every time I've ever been to the United States, they've treated me terribly. So I'm not willing to come back there unless you will integrate your audiences. And so the nightclub owner, as the book shows, he resisted a little bit at first. He was surprised and didn't quite know how he'd pull it off. But, they did do it. And they actually had, because of some weird curfew laws in Miami at the time, they had to actually bus people in from other parts of the city. And they had to fly people in from other cities, celebrities, they did for the opening performance. And pretty soon, there were no problems in Miami. Nobody protested. There was no reason why they shouldn't continue this policy. And the other nightclubs in Miami, they saw how well the Copa City Club in Miami was doing with Josephine Baker's performances and all these integrated audiences. They started integrating their audiences too. And this kind of thing happened throughout her US tour. She would say, I'm not performing unless you integrate your audience. And then they would, and then nothing bad would happen, except that they would have fewer empty seats and make more money. And so everyone started, doing it. So, and she had to cancel some performances, for example, in Atlanta,
Mm-hmm.
where she couldn't get a hotel in near the theater where she was performing because she was a person of color and she canceled her performances there. So she was very,
Right.
ultimately she was investigated by the FBI for her stands against racism. Um, at that time, anybody who spoke out against racism was suspected of being a communist. I'm sure that was a flimsy,
Yeah.
pretense. But she was, when she left the country, because, so many people, so many projects started getting canceled because of this big controversy she got involved in. And when she left, she was informed by the FBI that she wasn't welcome back in the United States.
That's
So she didn't return until 63. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I- yeah, and when I was reading the parts about when, I mean, first of all, the fact how brave she was. I mean, here she is, 19. She decides to go. She gets invited to go over to Paris, and she does, and it made me sad because I was like, look at how forward thinking, France was. She was marrying white guys. Like
Yeah.
and then you look at our country, and I was sad. It was like, wow, look at how far ahead they were, compared to what it's taken us. And and then she got to be, she got to be somebody over there, and she was so big, and so, she was like wasn't she like one of the most popular people in France at one time? I mean,
She was the most highly paid performer in Europe, of white, black, everyone.
that's
And
crazy.
yeah, and then when she came over here in 1934, like she couldn't get a good review.
Eh,
And, part of the problem was that she was suppressed. She was in the Ziegfeld Follies, and I think largely because of her race. Um, she was given a more minor role in that review than she had expected and than she was accustomed to having. And but also some of her fellow performers, including Fanny Brice, who was an extremely popular
Yep.
comic at the time, and even adopted some of Josephine Baker's routines into her performance. She was extremely hostile and racist to Josephine Baker. And so there was a scene in which Josephine Baker was supposed, well, at first, in the musical, she was dancing, and then she was lifted up by, I believe it was four white dancers lifted her up because she was wearing this gown made of gold chain, and it was so heavy. It took four. It was took four men to lift her up. So they all lifted her up in the air. But then somebody complained that these white men were touching a black woman on stage, and the scene was cut. But so she was suppressed. Her personality was repressed on the stage. She didn't get good reviews from, I think, a biased, prejudiced white press. But she opened her own nightclub in New York, and she had those white dancers lifting her up. Did all those things that she had wanted to do that she would have done on the stage in the States if she'd been allowed to. And her club was a huge hit. And the critics, the same critics, they all loved her in her nightclub. So
Yeah,
she
it
had,
seemed to me like they did love her, but they were so afraid to love her. Like I don't know. That was just
that's a
what.
good point. They might have been afraid to point it out, or,
Yeah,
there were a lot of politics
a lot of
in,
politics, right?
even in the, theatrical press at the time. I've been reading about that and seeing how, for example, the great acerbic drama critic Dorothy Parker in the
Yeah,
1920s and 30s, she lost her first job because her reviews were so scathing, and she angered some people with money who were putting on these shows. And Condé Nast, the publisher of Vanity Fair, fired her because of that.
wow.
So yeah,
Wow. Well, I just look at her now. Like, I want to tell everybody. Like, I'm like telling everybody. I'm like, do you know anything about her? Like, do you understand like what a part of history she was? And I love
yeah,
that Grace Kelly was like helping her and friended her,
yes,
and like that
right.
whole part of it just there's just so many like every era of her life. And you feel like she lives longer than what she actually does. She dies at
I know.
68, but what
Yeah,
a
yeah.
life, right? Like,
I know. And when you look at, I mean, like, I loved every part of this book. The hardest part for me to write was the hardest part for that people have told me the hardest part to read, which is the start of the book when she was a child
yeah,
and endured abuse.
yeah,
And it just, even as I was writing it, I'm thinking, this is, relentlessly grim. Who's
yeah,
going to want to read this? But I did insert, her grandmother, Elvira,
yeah,
as sort of a comic relief. She has some great lines in that book, I think, very fun.
yes,
And I inserted a scene, with her playing with her friends and jumping on the coal car and throwing coal down, and
yep,
what a hero she was with her friends, with all these boys she played with, to sort of, give a more well-rounded idea of what her, my childhood. I had an abusive childhood too, but I had all kinds of bright moments. And so,
right.
but then moving on to the black vaudeville scene, I was so fascinated by that
Oh my
era,
gosh.
all those great performers, and I found some amazing music. I really got introduced to a whole new musical world, and like the whole scene, traveling on their own train car, and getting off from town to town and performing in all these dumpy places, and having people like throw tomatoes, and having like the story with the guy jumping up from the audience
Yep.
and rushing the stage because he thought this, because of the villain, he thought it was real, or who knows. But people just got so excited by what they were doing, these vaudeville performers on stage, that it was very interactive. And I loved all that. And then, of course, the trip to Paris over the ocean, and all that happened in Europe.
Uh,
It was just, and then when you see, like, she was the first African American superstar. She was the first Black person, I believe, person of color, period, to star in a feature film. And she
right.
starred in at least three of them.
Yep.
There were others that, I've read about, but I haven't been able to find. So, but I've seen three of them, and she was the first Black woman to perform on the Paris stage. She was the first Black woman to have her name on the marquee in New York City on Broadway. She was the first Black um, opera singer to perform on the Paris Opera. You know, she had the lead role in Offenbach's
Mm.
operetta La Creole. And, you know, to do that and to do these amazing things, Josephine Baker remade herself again and again and again.
Yep.
You know, she was a comic who and dancer, and she always wanted to be a singer. And so after a short time in Europe, short time in Paris, she toured Europe. She left Paris for a couple of years, um, and took that time to not only perform her dances, but also to remake herself and to take voice lessons and to take elocution and to study French. And she came back to Paris as a diva and as a singer, as a chanteuse. And so she became the elegant singer in the feathers
Yeah.
and the long gowns. And, you know, she still danced, but singing was, you know, her heart's desire. And so she remade herself into a singer. And then when the occasion called for it, she remade herself into a World War II spy and learned to fly a plane. And then she remade herself again into a civil rights activist and also into the mother of 12 children, babies from all around the world, to prove she had this rainbow tribe to prove to the world that racism is not something that's learned. I mean, it's not something that we're born with, but it's something that we're taught. It's
Yeah.
something that's and her children grew up, everything I've read, they grew up to be very close. And, you know, she had babies from Japan and babies from, you know, South America and babies from Europe and, you know, all different cultures, races, nationalities, um, 10 boys and 2 girls. And they all grew up to be very close. So I think that her experiment, you know, succeeded. She was like Angelina Jolie in a way, but she was
Yeah.
like
Like,
publicly saying, "This is why I'm doing this," you know. So
yeah, and she was like a one woman show. I
yeah,
mean, that's what she made herself into. She goes over there to dance, but basically ends up being this one woman show. And that I was like, wow, I mean, what was inside of her? I just want to tap into, like, she had such, I don't, strength inside of her. Like, it's crazy. I'm like, I'm going to keep watching things on her because, you know, when I was watching her dance and I was thinking, now we watch her dance in this time period and we're like, okay, she was a good dancer. But I am sure that back in those days, that was just an amazingly out there, like, just, people weren't used to that style of dance that she just kind of brought to her shows. And I think that first the comedian is like, didn't she have to first try to pull it off as a comedian to make it funny? But then it was actually, she was amazing. So, but in order for people to accept it, she had to act like she was being silly, right?
right. It was her way of standing out,
Standing up. Yeah.
um, and you know, I think the scene that I've written in the book from her first performance is probably pretty spot on, where she was, you know, had taken this role that nobody else wanted, where she was, they had a wire
Yeah.
and they attached her
Yeah.
to, you know, this contraption that they moved back and forth across, that was attached to the rafters, and she was way up high over the stage, and the wire moved back and forth, and she was, you know, playing Cupid, and so she was, you know, had these wings, and she was flying on this, you know, across the stage. And in her first performance, the one of her wings caught the curtain that was behind, you know, lining the back of the stage and the backdrop curtain, and she, you know, couldn't get it free, and she was tangled up, and she was like sort of spinning around, and you know, going, you know, cattywampus, and then she was scared, of course, because you're up there. You don't know
Yeah.
what's going to. But when her defense mechanism kicked in when she saw that the audience was totally quiet. She started, making faces and like goofing around, and people started laughing, and that was the beginning of her comic career. Um, and From then on, like whenever she was in the chorus
Dude,
dancing, she was the end dancer,
yeah.
and sort of the tradition was that the dancer on the end was the funny one.
Yeah.
And at first, she started doing it on like not as the funny one. She would like deliberately like not follow the steps everybody else was doing, and part of that was because Josephine Baker either couldn't or wouldn't follow choreography.
Right.
She was very free. And so, she learned to dance on the streets of St. Louis as a small child. She grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, which at that time was one of the major cities of the United States.
Right.
And they had the largest train station in the country. It was a hub for all the trains, which were, the predominant form of transportation at the time, train travel. And so they had like all these great musicians playing here, and they had the Mississippi River and the riverboats.
Right.
And so Louis Armstrong played here in on the riverboats. Scott Joplin played
Huh?
in St. Louis on Market Street. Played the piano, ragtime, and they had all these other great performers. And so people who couldn't afford to go into the clubs, they would make their own music on the streets, and they even would bring pianos out on the streets and play them, and people would dance in the streets, and they would do these African American dances. They were
Mhm.
called Black Bottom and the Turkey Trot, and a
Yeah.
lot of them were named after animals, which was kind of fun. But Josephine Baker, she would get out there and do these dances too. She's a very musical child and had lots of energy, and she started making money. I mean, like they would throw coins at her feet when she danced, and this became a way for her to help supplement her family's income. And those dances are the dances; those dance moves are the ones she took with her
Yeah.
when she danced on the stage. And so, because she either couldn't or wouldn't follow the choreography, for one thing that happened was the other dancers in the troupe that she was with resented her because she was taking all the, hogging the spotlight for herself. But the audiences loved her, and they thought she was doing it to be funny.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah, it's just I want to thank you for writing this book. I mean, it was so much fun to read and just to be a part of that world. Like I feel like I'm still in it because I just finished it this morning, so I'm still like in that world. And I was watching videos while I was eating lunch, and I'm like, oh, this is so. It was so. I encourage everybody go watch the performances. I mean, they're on YouTube, and it.
yeah.
it
I'm gonna.
Go ahead.
My website is under reconstruction, and we've had a few setbacks, but my hope is to throw up a bunch of stuff
Yeah.
about being onto my website so that people have one place they can go to see everything. My big regret is that we don't yet have soundtracks with ebooks, because
Yes.
wouldn't that be fun if when
Oh,
you
that
got
would have been
certain
so
channels?
much fun. Oh,
So I want to do a Spotify playlist
yes. Yes,
to
you
go with the book.
should.
So yeah.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so I'm going to have the links listed below for this, but before I let you go, I want to know who's next because you write so many good books.
I haven't decided. I one thing I know is that I would really love to spend the next several years of my life in the company of writers.
Mm.
So I really would like to write about a writer. Um,
Hmm.
and but I also I mean, like I have all kinds of ideas. I'm also contemplating doing something be set a little bit in the future.
Ooh.
One of the things I do as a freelance writer for additional income is to write about technology and new technologies and like artificial intelligence and
Hmm.
kind of thing. And I love the show Black Mirror on Netflix. And so I thought, wouldn't it be fun to write something sort of like that? Sort of, I almost hesitate to call it science fiction, but
Right.
I guess it's the genre, something set in the near future that shows, how technology affects what it means to be human, which I think is it
Mm.
definitely is doing. So that's another idea. I've also been my daughter's really encouraging me to write my memoir. Uh, I've had a
Mm.
I've had a life maybe not as exciting as Josephine Baker's, but I swear it's pretty darn close. So, and I've had almost as many lovers as she had too.
Oh, right. I love, first of all, I love memoirs. So I love memoirs so much. But this book, and I saw your other books, I was like, you write about these strong women and you bring them to life. And
That's
I'm
right.
just so grateful that I got to read it and that now I know who she is. And not only do I know who she is, I know so much. I know so much about her. So I am so grateful for that. And,
Well, thank
you
you. It
know,
is my privilege to bring her to the public consciousness
uh,
as soon as possible. I
because you
think
were right. There isn't that much written about her. So, that was just so
no,
perfect. Perfect that you got to
there are
write.
lots of biographies,
Right.
but they're all so different. Because,
Yes.
gosh, I hate to get started on another topic. I know you want to wrap up, but I just want to say that Josephine Baker, as my novel shows, she loved to reinvent herself and she
Yeah.
loved to make up stories about her life. And so she was the ultimate unreliable narrator.
Yeah.
So, we don't, because she was constantly changing the story. First, they think they know who her father is. You can
Right.
go on Wikipedia and see who they say her father was, but nobody really knows because her mother would never say.
Right.
And so, she would make it up. Like her father was at one point a white man, and
Yeah.
he was a Spanish guitarist, and then he was also a Jewish man. So she never knew, and she just liked to make it up. And different biographies of her give different versions of her life as well. So that's another thing I want to do with my website is put up a bibliography page and just sort of tell you like my opinions of the different
Yeah.
biographies because
Right.
some of them are like fantasy fairy tales in themselves. I mean,
Aw.
because they rely so much on her own words.
Right. Exactly. Well, you know what? Whatever you write next, you know where to find me because I will read it
Thank
and we can
you.
talk
Thank you so
again.
much.
Yeah, it was so much fun to
Thanks.
talk to you. And
Same here.
I will have all of your sites listed below here, along with Amazon.
Okay.
You can go get this book right now. You can get it on your Kindle today if you want. So thank you so much, Sherry. You have an
Yes, and
amazing
anyone,
weekend.
please write to me at jonessherry@me.com. Anyone listening, I will always respond to everything. I love to talk about Josephine Baker, and I'm also very active on all the social media. So,
Oh, I will put that down there too,
yeah,
so anybody can
yeah,
just click on it. Okay.
yeah. Okay, thank you. Bye
Awesome.
bye.
Thank you. Bye bye. I talked way too long with her, but it was worth it. I would have talked another hour. Seriously, you can't talk about Josephine Baker in 15 minutes. There was just too much to talk about. And I have a whole list of questions I didn't even get to ask her, but go read the book. You will love it. I swear her writing is lyrical. It is so beautiful. And I even have quotes here that I didn't get to say because there are so many good quotes in this book too. So thank you so much, Sherry. All of her links will be listed below here. Thank you everybody for watching us.